Tony, welcome to Unusual Attitudes. So my first question for everyone is, who's Antonio Howard?
Great question, hard question. It's like, tell me a little bit about yourself. I would say Antonio Howard is a person who takes in information and decides his own path. I am a husband, father, friend. Grew up with the nickname The Rebel because I ask a lot of questions because at the base of everything, I want to understand it and I want to understand the why. So I think those things would describe me in a nutshell.
So curiosity is a big driver for you, like just a constant yearning for knowledge.
I would not say that.
No.
So when things are presented to me, I want to understand them, but I wouldn't say I'm not one of those. I'm a lifelong learner. People learners not like in my top 5 from a Gallup perspective. Right. But I do like when I do get into a topic, I want to understand it.
Yep. So let's go back a little bit. I'm interested to understand as a child, growing into adolescent in teenage years, how did that actually play out for you? Because that's you don't hear that often. You just said it. The most common line is, I'm a lifelong learner. I'm always seeking this new stuff. And the way that you've just described it is things are coming to you. And if there's an interest, you're going to dig deeper. And otherwise, it sounds like you're just kind of, some stuff is a bit throwaway for you. Right. But how does that play out as a kid? Like that almost is describing yourself as a little bit introverted.
So I do probably consider myself introverted with extroverted personality traits. I'll give an example from childhood that probably describes it best. So as a child, and when I got into that age of there being homework, it made no sense to me. I'm like, I'm going to a building for X amount of hours for you all to send me home with work. Why did I not do the work here? Right. And so back to that rebel part. So I would not do homework at home. I would figure out how to do homework in school because I did not see the point of, like, why am I coming here for X amount of hours for you all to send me with 2 or 3 hours worth of work? And so, as I said, I always kind of take in information, and that was a structure that never made sense to me. And I would just kind of deal with that. So me and teachers had a very interesting relationship.
Well, how does that play out with your teachers? Because clearly, especially, we're probably not far in age and grew up in a time when there was probably, and for many people, very rigid structures around this is how you learn. You go to school for 6 to 7 hours. You get 30 to 90 minutes of homework a night. You come in the next day at school and you review what you did the night before, and this is how you're graded. And if that's not working for you, how do you negotiate your way through school then? Like, did you get really good at that?
So I got really good at that. So the first period would be the period that if I had to, I would do that work. So when I got to school, that work was at least complete. And then if I had homework, I would do it the period before, because I just mentally I refuse to be in school that long and take work home.
Right. So what do you coming out of school, at the end of the day, if you've sort of negotiated your own way into, I'm going to get this work done, which most people wouldn't do, by the way, right? Most people are going to say, I'm just going to do this at home, then what are you doing with your time at home? I mean, there has to be a driver. It can't just be, and maybe it is, but it can't just be, I don't want to do the homework. There must be something.
It wasn't about not wanting to do the homework. Right. It didn't make sense to me.
Doing it that time.
Well, it didn't make sense to me that we didn't use the time in school.
Right.
And the amount of time we spent there. It simply, and that's how my mind works. It just was simply, we're here for all of these hours. Yes, you taught me something. You could have given me 15, 20 minutes to do the work here. Now, if I didn't finish, that's different. But to spend all day with you talking and sitting around and then sending me home with work,
So do you think in time blocks? Like, because that sounds like it's a common structure for, individuals that they have a structure, but like you're able to move from one subject to another, but don't commingle them. right? Like, this is the time that I've allotted for that. I will be responsible for optimizing that time. But afterwards, if I didn't, fine, that's my fault. But otherwise, I'm moving on to this other thing.
No one has ever explained it that way, but yes, probably.
Yeah.
And I'm similar with work. Like
Right.
I'm protective of my personal time,
Right.
as it relates to that. So I would never be the guy that worked 80 hours a week.
Yeah. My wife, and she doesn't mind me saying this, we talk about it all the time. You know, she struggles with ADD, and people with ADD. I'm not saying that you have ADD, but this is where I learned it from, where I learned the time block, and I also learned that people that like these structures like this also really enjoy, and I'll simplify it to say the checklist, right? I've got a checklist, whether it's a mental checklist or a physical checklist. Once I check that off, I'm done. I've checked out and I'm moving on to the next thing. Like, do you think that way, that
I don't-
logically?
Well, I'm very logical, but I'm not a checklist. So this
Okay.
goes to the introvert extrovert dynamic. So I'm very maybe logic. I'm very linear,
Okay.
right? And so logically, the school part, like, it didn't make sense. And if it does make sense to me, it's very hard for me to do it. And that's probably a part of my personality I should work on. Things I've tried to work on throughout my career, because it is really hard for me to do things that don't make sense to me.
Right. But that's also a driver for you, right? Like, you either try to make sense of it or find a way to work it into a way that it makes sense for you. But
Yes.
how does that then translate into you're a senior leader at Regions Bank in technology? How does the way that you think, reveal itself, especially as a leader in an organization of other people? Did you have to find ways to help folks understand the way that you work? Not that they're adapting to you, but because as leaders, we all learn to, each individual in an organization needs to be treated, obviously with respect, but also the way that they are going to be optimizing, their productivity. But it is very different, right? It is very different. Or do you find that you attract people that work similarly to you and it works that way? Like, what is your team makeup and how do you lead them with such a interesting personality?
So the thing I would do for free is coach, right? And so from my coaching style, I don't want you to be like me. I want to learn who you are, and my job as your coach is to maximize that talent. And so that is where, and how I've always led my teams. I learn who you are, how you work, what you do best, what you may not do best, and I try not to put you in those situations. So from coaching the kids, sports teams, I had coached soccer, basketball. I wouldn't take a kid in his first year of soccer and say, you're going to play striker, because he's not going to find success there. I put him in a position where he can kind of get exposure to the game, learn the game, understand what he's good at, whether he's quick, whether he's a good defensive player, and then I would put him in those positions to be successful. So that's what I try to do as a leader, is to learn what my people like, their personalities, again, maybe some blind spots for them, and then try to put them in the best situation to be successful.
And, when especially your work at Regions, and especially with technology, the diversity of personalities and attitudes, the diversity of learning, from that point of view, do you find it more interesting, because it is a more diverse, technology can range from everything, from one area, where people don't really know anything. And you and I have had the conversation around artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. We've had the conversation around, working with technologies that are a little bit legacy. And that's really challenging because people kind of get set, but then you want to challenge them, but you may not have availability of a new system, right, to be able to do that. How do you keep their interest in all that? Because it's a lot of work as a leader to learn your people, but it's even more work to keep them interested in engaging with your leadership.
So what I would say is, let me back up. I'll talk about me personally for a sec. So I've always kind of been a closet techie who ended up in a role managing technology. From when I was in elementary school, I used to teach kindergartners how to read on an Apple computer with the 5 1/4 floppy. So I've always had technology in my background. In my HR career, although I was sat in compliance, I was a part of every system implementation of every employer that I worked for throughout my career. So I knew the technology, but I would never call myself a technology person, personality wise. So for me, it's a balance of the technology is very logical, straight line, linear, but then I also get to interact with people. So from a team, I guess a team management perspective, again, for me, ultimately is understanding people's needs and putting them in those positions. I'm not the leader that's like, everybody has to grow and develop. Some people just want to come in and do a good job and do the best job in that role, and that's what they want. So it's really understanding that person's needs and desires, and for me as a manager, helping facilitate that. And sometimes that's leaving me, right? Hey, Tony, I need you to develop me in this area because I want to take this next step. And we can have those honest conversations.
Well, that, interestingly enough, I think leads to a value conversation. What do you value in the people that you work with? Like if someone's coming to your team, it's not, of course it's always about, there's a technical knowledge and things like, put all those things aside again. Yep. But what do you look for in value alignment?
Open to learn, being friendly. I mean, it's probably a hard way to say it, but I'm a firm believer in treating people the way you want to be treated. And so if I would not like someone to do something to me, I try not to do that to them. And I guess early in my career, because my background is actually in finance. So somebody I spoke with about a job opportunity said, hey, I have this job in HR with your numbers background and everything. I think you'd be great at. So I think I approach people in that. I feel like everybody has the capacity to learn to an extent in roles. And so I am looking for how they learn, what their attention to detail in terms of what they want to produce from a work perspective. Those things are more important to me than honestly the technical skills, because I feel like you can teach skills. You can't teach drive, wanting to do the right thing, that desire to make sure that end user or customer gets a good experience, right? Everybody, it's just not innate for everybody. Yep. So those things are more important to me. Those soft skills are more important to me.
Yeah, I would agree. Some time ago, it's probably still up, I wrote an article for LinkedIn about how to hire high performers. And it really could apply to anyone. But the value proposition that I talked about, and let's see if you agree with this, was I don't care about the technical skills. Again, you're not gonna, if you're not a Python engineer, you're not gonna get hired. Like, right. But so, and your proficiency, that technical skill will determine some things, but it's not really the most important thing. Right. The most important thing to me is I hire for, and I value most people that understand. They have an aptitude for understanding things, and they have an attitude that aligns with the values of the organization, and also the ability to help us learn their values, which will evolve the culture of the organization. So it really boils down to these two things. It's attitude and aptitude. How important is that to you on your team? You talked about being happy. That's an attitude, right? And knowing nobody's happy all the time, right? But it's a general sense of happiness.
Happiness is a choice for me, right? I think people that struggle with happiness are looking for external sources of it, and it's a decision, right? Because as we know, life will happen. We all go through things. Everything's not going to be perfect, and it's really how you react to those things. And being that, and again, some people aren't wired to find the positive, right? So they have to put a little effort in that. But in every experience, I look to learn and find a positive thing in that. As I tell my kids, I never fail. I either succeed or learn.
Yeah. And you had, if you don't remember me talking about it, what happened last year to you and your family, this is a perfect example, right? You had a house fire.
Mm-hmm.
That had to be very traumatic for your family, huge change. Have been out of your house now for a while. You just came back about a month ago. Yeah, into that. So out of the house for a little over a year, right? Yep. What? Tell me about the moment that happened, that experience. Like, what was going through your mind? First off, thank God your family was okay.
Right.
Of course, that but outside of that, everyone's fine.
Yep.
What's the first thing you're feeling then?
Knocked down. Right. I put in a call to work, like, hey, this happened, stand outside the house watching it burn up. So I honestly, most of the feelings were very ego driven. If I'm honest with myself, it was, wow, you work so hard to provide these things, get a nice house, and it just burns up. Just, so a lot of that in probably the first 20 minutes or so. 20
just
to 30
20 minutes?
So for context,
right,
2 hours and 45 minutes to put the fire out.
Wow, that's a long time.
I'm standing outside with neighbors and firemen and all of this, so you got a lot of time to think. And so, that was kind of the first thing, and then from there, start really paying attention to what the firemen were doing. Like, why can't we get this thing out? You got here pretty quickly. Like, why is this thing still burning? And then it looked like it'd get in control, and then we'd have flare up. So going through that, but checking on my wife, who was not taking it as well, and rightfully so. Making sure the kids were okay. My oldest happened to be home, so he went and took the younger kids to go get something to eat. Just so my mind had shifted into kind of making sure everything's okay. Start planning. Who am I calling? Who do I need to call? And start having some of those thoughts. And just as I was standing out there with the firemen, multiple of the firemen said, "Do you need us to call Red Cross or someone?" And at about the fifth one asking me that, I said, "We're good," because it was just stuff, right? It was going to be very traumatic, but I knew where I was going. Family was safe. We'll figure it out, right? And there was somebody going through that evening that didn't know where they were going.
Right.
So,
yep.
So that was it. We'll be fine. And because, again, sucks that it happened to us, but one of my childhood friends, he was there. Family came, even though we told them not to. 200 to 300 people in the neighborhood out there, they're out helping. So seeing the positive.
So is that why? I mean, it's emotional. Like, yes. I'm getting emotional sitting here, but and I'm wondering why you're emotional. What I'm drawing from it is you had this community just surround you.
Yes.
Right. And did you realize how deeply cared for you were? I mean, I'm sure you do to some extent, but
you think, right?
Yeah.
So no, again, just the aftermath and the community neighbors that, I live in a 400 home subdivision that, people driving by, hey, here's some money. So you don't know that until you're in that situation. But again, getting emotional. Didn't get to be emotional that night, right?
Uh-huh.
But again, before it was all over with, before the fire was even out, that was good. Because again, I was thinking there's somebody in this situation that doesn't have these things.
Yep. Yeah, and I think it's always interesting if you have the capacity to think outside your situation and just know that there might have been a family somewhere else
right.
that is not standing on the side of the curb.
Right.
They didn't make it out.
And it was
right?
It was a storm. It was a lightning strike.
Yep.
And we were talking to the firemen. We were one of 5 houses they were at, right? So, I'm like, nope, we're good. Yeah. We've got We know where we're going. Really, I was, and also I'm thinking, because the fire was on one side of the house and the kids' room were on the other side of the house, and I'm in my mind, I'm saying, stay over here. I can replace my stuff. Let me save the kids' stuff too.
Yeah. So what is then the conversation evolved to with the kids, right? Like, so after you have that night, right?
Yep.
Everyone's good.
Yep.
You lose all your stuff, but everyone's good.
Yep.
And knowing that there were, 4 other homes that night that,
Yep.
Maybe people weren't as good. What's the conversation the next couple of days with the kids? Because that for them, they don't have your life experience.
Right.
You're the leader of your family, yourself and your wife they're looking to you going,
Yep.
Mom, Dad, what's next? What's that conversation like?
So I actually didn't want to take them to the house the next day because it was at night. So even when we were in it, like you knew it was damaged, but you couldn't see the damage. So me and my wife were going, and I just wanted to go assess. She brought the kids, so I was like, okay, all right, we're gonna do this. But really, we just, we kind of walk through, and you get to see like really the devastation and what 3 hours of pumping water into your home looks like. But the conversation with them was very real and matter of fact. So look, everybody, I want to set expectations up front. What we're seeing, best case scenario, we're going to be gone for a year. Worst case, 18 months. But I said, I know you got to process. I know we got to go through stuff, but I want to set realistic expectations and questions. So as you're working through everything mentally and as you're feeling things, please come to me, please come to your mother. Let's have a conversation about it. But realistically, it's going to be 12 months before we're home. So just keep that in mind as you're kind of working through things. And it at least set, again, an expectation for them that it wasn't going to be, we'll be home in a month. Now, they managed well through it. I don't know if that was a part of it or I was just lucky. They were great throughout the whole process. But, that's really the conversation with them was really, again, to be upfront and honest, have that set the expectation of, unfortunately, this is going to be a process and we'll get through it together. We'll take care of it. But, here's realistically how long it might be before we're home again.
Yeah, and that's sort of a theme, and you and I have talked on several occasions. I get that as a theme from you. Like, let's just look at what it is.
Right.
This is the moment we're in, right? And we'll accept it for what it is, and then we'll move on from there. Do you find like that's it's a very traumatic moment going through this entire experience, and I'm sure you've had other experiences in life that were very traumatic. But and maybe with your kids, but this is a big one with the kids. How, as a parent, you all moved back in just a little over a month ago. What was that moment like? It's like you're homing. So you rebuilt in the same place,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you rebuild the same house?
To an extent.
Right.
Fortunately, we built it the first time 10 years ago.
Right.
So it was pretty much to spec of what we wanted. So we changed the little things that, you would, it's like, do I really want to?
Like 10 years of being there, you go, well, let's change that one thing.
Right. So little small things like that, but pretty much built it back to the original floor plan.
Right. But when you go to the kids and say, we're ready to go home, right? Does it feel like the end of one journey and the beginning of a new one? Or does it feel like we're going back to where we were?
End of one journey, start of a new one, because, we lost 85% of our possessions. So those have to be replaced. So I chose not to try to do that while we were out of the house because I didn't want to worry about storing it and all of these things, or us buying something 6 months and then we don't want it when we get in the house. So now we're transitioning into that part of now we have to go back in and get the stuff. So and I also made a decision to get us in the house a little quicker. Of it wasn't finished, but it was finished enough for us to be home. So we actually over the last month has been finishing up a lot of those little things. So workers in and out of the house. But what I say, it was a great decision because it was just gratifying to see the kids being in their space and appreciating being home.
So through this, and I'll bring us to a little bit of a close here. This story is amazing to me because I almost feel like everything in your life brought you to that moment, right? Everything you learned when we start this conversation, you talk about, just being happy, and you're watching your house down, and not that you're happy about it, but you're finding a way to, like, I have to step up, I have to lead my family through this. Yep. And the last thing they need to see is dad not being happy, not being overly joyful about the house, but to lead that through. What would you tell someone that is experiencing that right now? They're in a really tough spot. What's the advice that you give them?
Find the lesson or the positive in those situations. The thing that I'll share that I have to work on is I don't dwell. And that's a trait that I have to watch because people need the time and opportunity to process things. And I process things very quickly. As you can hear from my description of about the time frame of dealing with this house thing while I was watching it burn. So I have to make space for friends, family, other people to process things because to your point, I'm pretty mad. I'm like, once it happened, like you can't undo the happened. So what is next? And so I get to what is next pretty quickly. And so I have to kind of monitor that. But what I tell people is, what is it that you can draw on the positive from this? Now, what I can say is I've learned a lot about this process. I can help friends, family, or others that go through it. I know what's good about it. I know what's bad about it. I learned a lot of things along the way about this process. So not that I ever wanted to, but a lot of learning, I actually feel like I could project manage building a house now. So
new skills,
new skill, maybe a business opportunity down the road. Finding a good trades crew to do all the work, but find that thing, and it can be the smallest of things. Doesn't have to be a big thing, but find that thing and focus on it till it multiplies. To kind of get out of those, to get past it and get back into that productive mind space.
That's brilliant. We're going to end there. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Tom.
Thank you.